And now, Elizabethan walks and Tudor knot gardens are just a couple of the horticultural delights to be found at the National Garden Festival, Stoke-On-Trent.
Hello, good morning. This is BBC Radio Stoke, broadcasting live from the National Garden Festival in the heart of the Midlands. Our first music of the morning is jazz in traditional style.
Before you get into the National Garden Festival, there's a feeling of Mardi Gras. Yes, the accent is on fun right the way from the start. There's live music and street theatre and strolling entertainers. There are clowns and stilt walkers and monocyclists and a whole host of magical characters to keep the children entertained, whatever age they may be. Yes, it's a real fun family day out. So if you're a keen gardener who wants to look at plants, you don't have to leave your family at home, because there's plenty here for them too. Of course, as a gardener myself, it's the plants and gardens that I've come here to see. There are plenty of bright new ideas and lessons to learn, and a whole wealth of interest. This third world village, for example, gives you an idea of how the folks garden in far-off Ethiopia. Neat rows of vegetables are grown on terraces to counter soil erosion. And they're not grown for fun. They're a necessary life support for every family. And that's just one of the dozens of gardens you can see here at the festival, each one with lessons to learn and ideas you can take back and use in your own garden. Here, for example, they've taken two extremes of conditions and shown you how to solve them. Up here is a steeply sloping bank. The soil is dry and sandy and it's in full sun, and that always causes problems for gardeners. They've solved it by planting it with herbaceous perennials and shrubs. Now, of course, you've got to plant the right plants, so wise gardeners bring with them a notebook and a pencil and make sure that you know exactly what the plants are. They've put them in big sweeping drifts, planted close together, so that they will compete with any weeds and reduce the maintenance to a minimum. And these perennials, of course, will come up year after year after year and give you this season-long show of colour. And on this side, they've solved the problem in a different way, with a rock garden and a cascading waterfall. And if it looks to you as if it's been here forever, well, that's the idea. But in fact, it's made with a load of rock, a butyl liner, and a little submersible pump to pump the water round and round the system time and time again. It's expensive, but if you're an active gardener, it certainly isn't impossible to do it yourself. And down at the bottom of the garden here, just the reverse of conditions. Here the soil is heavy, wet and badly drained and in full shade, and how many gardeners have those sort of conditions to cope with? It can be pretty depressing when you've got to face that sort of situation, but when you see what you can do with it by choosing the right plants, there's a real lift to the spirits.
There are umpteen ways of getting here. You can even come by brightly painted narrowboat on the Trent and Mersey Canal, past the gloomy Shelton Steelworks, to be dropped off in a specially constructed marina. It's a lot more fun than the M6, and this mode of transport drops you off right outside the pub. And when you've had your refreshment, you can take a constitutional down the Pebble Mill Street to look at gardens of the 80s. 60 members of the Horticultural Trades Association submitted designs for 11 gardens, which were planted before the houses were built. Now, gardens like Rum's should reflect the taste of their owners and provide them with the facilities they need. And these plots are real pocket hankies, just 19 feet long by 8 feet wide. And here's a garden that offers what a lot of people want, a good splash of colour backed up by foliage, and a pleasantly shaped lawn that's just small enough to allow you to get it manicured like Wimbledon without breaking your back or the bank. It's rather fun to walk down this street and imagine who might be living in each of the different houses, because the gardens reflect the taste of the owners. Here's one that really does belong to a plantsman, but I'd guess actually it's a plantswoman. I should think she's about 50, unmarried, a school teacher, and really keen on bits of plants that she brings back from all her travels. And her enthusiasm has rubbed off on the chap who lives next door. Now, he is the art master at the school, because here you can see bits of sculpture, and over in the corner, some of the clay pots he throws as demonstration models have been turned into a little pool. Next door lives a couple who like a summer holiday in the Mediterranean. The only trouble is it lasts just 2 weeks, but for the other 50, they can come back home and pretend they're still there, because they've laid out their garden in a series of circular patios. Beautiful places to sit in the summer sun, and the heat that strikes and comes off those patios turns the aromas of the plants that surround it into beautiful fragrances that assail your nose. It's a lovely place to be for the other 50 weeks in the year. A garden for the romantic, or for the city dweller who likes to pretend to himself that he really lives in the country. Thickly planted, which gives it a romantic feel, but it's also eminently practical because it keeps down the weeds and doesn't let them sneak in. But practicalities aside, over there's also a nice shady bower where you can bill and coo of an evening with your sweetheart. But gardens are essentially places for all the family, and that can pose problems. How do you fit the kiddlywinks in and yourself, because they're probably going to trample all over your plants? Well, you've got to keep them happy in one corner, even if it's a tiny garden, by building them something like this, out of railway sleepers. Slide, swing, climbing frame, the lot, and underneath it barks that if they do fall and come a perler, they don't crack their skulls. And the plants, well, they're over the other side, also protected by those same railway sleepers. And this way, everybody's happy, aren't you? Come on then. But it's not just a garden for the family, it's a festival for the family too.
There are children's play areas all over the site. According to the guidebook, this one's suitable for children of all ages. Now, I haven't been on one of these slides since I was a kid, so I'm going to have a go. Do you mind? Can I come down with you, little one? Clear the way. Whoa. Almost as exciting as plants. But talking about plants, there are plants here, especially wild plants, and they're growing, as you would expect for a castle, in the moat outside. One of the most exciting aspects of waterways, especially canals, of which there are a lot around Stoke-On-Trent, are the aquatic plants. And looking down into this moat, I can see 3 of my favourites. Directly below me, the water soldier. They look like pineapple tops sunk in the water. They live on the bottom of the water, most of them, and come up to flower. And they have white flowers which stand up like soldiers, but they have sword-like leaves. Just round the corner is the lesser spearwort. It's a kind of buttercup, small yellow flowers, quite typical, but narrow leaves like a spear. And if the water soldier and the spearworts don't keep you away from the castle, then Jenny Greenteeth will. Because just there, down in the bottom, that thin film of green on the water top is the duckweed. And we were always told as kids in the north that underneath that film of green lived a water boggart or witch called Jenny Greenteeth. And if you went anywhere near it, she'd have you. This is just a few of the wildflowers that are found on the site. On the hills beyond, there's a whole range of other kinds. Here's a piece of nostalgia for you. Beautiful, colourful area. I remember my grandfather telling me stories of meadowlands in his boyhood days, especially cornfields, filled with colourful wildflowers, especially annual flowers. Annual flowers like corn cockles. They're here, mostly finished. There's just the odd pale rose flower still to be seen. But at the moment, corn flowers, that unmistakable, true cornflower blue of the cornflower. And there are mayweeds, rather like large daisies. And with them, corn marigolds, golden yellow daisy flowers, reflecting the sun into your eyes. Those must have been amazing days. Also been a boy then, Victorian times. But you can recreate that, as they have in many parts of this site and in many parts of the country. Waste areas, disturbing the soil, and buying these wildflower seed mixes, which you can just scatter onto the soil, and you can produce your own piece of Victoriana, your piece of nostalgia, your colourful carpet. This is a place where wildflowers, such as we've been looking at on the hills back there, and foreign plants come together. An old cottage garden. This one was made by the Cottage Garden Society. It's a real hugger-mugger of plants of all kinds. In the corner there, there are fruit trees, soft fruit trees, various kinds. Vegetables, a wide variety of vegetables. Perennial plants in many coloured forms. Even annuals which have been sown in the patches in between the perennials. All these are growing up in a great mass, which really leaves very little room for weeds. There are one or two weeds, and which garden doesn't have weeds? But you can hardly see them. You've got to look closely. And what you end up with is a lovely tapestry of colours. And then with the colours, of course, you get the fragrance, the various scents. And those scents bring in another element which every garden should have, and that is the butterflies, the bees, and the other insects which love the flowers.
You can buy almost anything here at the festival, from a pair of gardening gloves right through to a whole range of plants that you can see here at the festival. If you're wondering what I've bought, this is called a sagger. It's made out of fire clay and it's used by local potters for firing their pots. Now, I'm going to use it to plant up something like this. The sagger actually is made in two parts, the top and the bottom. The chap who makes the top part is called a sagger maker's frame filler, and the chap who makes the bottom part, yes, it really is true. And in the big top, there's lots of fun and entertainment for the children. Clowns and comedians, mime artists and magicians, they're all here, and the kids are loving it. The whole emphasis of the festival is on a good day out, not just for the gardener and the family, but for everyone. Oh yes, the fun is fast and furious, but for me, this is what I've really come for, the gardens. This is the Elizabethan garden, and it's the sort of formal setting that was much loved by our aristocratic ancestors. Looking at this, not a lot of relevance to your little plot at home, you may think. But hang on, either side there's a whole collection of little gardens that are full of good ideas, and they're all ideas that you can simply pick up, take home and put in your own plot. And round the corner here is an Elizabethan idea I know you're going to want to do. The Elizabethan knot garden consisted of a whole series of low hedges, normally box, laid out in formal fashion, but the beds that they created in the middle were planted entirely informally, so you got the best of both worlds. This garden here is planted entirely with herbs. And if it's a bit more colour you're after, then there's no reason why you shouldn't mix herbaceous plants in with the herbs to give you some more flower. But for a real colour show, of course, annuals are the thing, and this garden is planted entirely with annuals. Later on, when these die down, they'll be pulled out and replaced with bulbs and biennials. But this is the one that really appeals to me. This is a vegetable knot garden, and it's living proof that the vegetable garden needn't look unattractive. Each one of these bays is filled with a different kind of vegetable, and they're interplanted with all sorts of flowers. That's not only to make it look attractive, but also to attract to the garden all those insects that live on insect pests, and that means you're not going to have to use chemical sprays.
You may not be able to get to the festival site by cable car, but by golly, when you're here, this is the place to be. It really is fantastic. You really can't afford to miss it. This is one of the longest systems, if not the longest, of its kind in Britain. It's called Sky Ride, and it's over 600 metres long, up and round and back again. At its highest point, which we're now approaching, it's 170 metres above sea level. From here, you can see a whole range of different features. The dragon on the hillside there. From the ground, you can make out that it is a dragon. But from here, you can see all the different distinct patterns and parts of the body. The tail and that ridged back. Different coloured bedding plants which make up the plates and the armour and the claws of the feet there. And right below these beautiful water features, there's one here, there must be 3 pools, each connecting, and they're surrounded by beds of colourful annuals, and that water reflecting the sun and the droplets on the lily pads there. I can see a dome, the glass dome there. It's like a miniature, one of the caliph's palaces of Baghdad, or maybe the Mughals of India, and droplets representing the tears, maybe, of some empress. Beds of beautiful coloured annuals, bedding plants, foliage plants, acres of glass housing all manner of... There's a market down there somewhere.
Okay, so you want to set through?
Great. That's what I call a real fun experience. A great experience for the family, especially children. And talking about children, as I was coming down there, I saw a children's garden, but a garden with a difference, because this one had been made entirely by the children. I'm going to take a closer look. This garden festival isn't just about what the professional can do. School children as well. This garden was built entirely by Glebe County primary school children. They're from Stoke-On-Trent. And really it would do credit to any professional. It's been laid out in various areas using different kinds of plants. Beds here of annuals. A pergola at the back there with the Russian vine being trained over. Hanging baskets. A paved area here, and in between the paving, heathers of various kinds. Look at these old chimney pots. Beautiful displays, colourful displays of fuchsias, blue lobelias, helichrysum, and look at that, the Three Bears cottage in the wood. Wildflowers, British native plants around the cottage there. And that vegetable display, by crikey, I wish that was in my own garden. A superb and a credit to them.
Just in case you should think this is all a far cry from your Parks Department bedding scheme, the local authorities are here in force to show just what they can do when their imaginations are allowed to run riot. This handsome pergola has been built by Leeds City Council. You can tell it's Leeds when you see the cobbled floor to this rotunda in the centre. Now, Leeds is right next to the moors. Up over the dry stone wall, and you're on the moors among pine trees and larches through which foxgloves push, and then you can get up onto the silvery tussock grass that some people call silver spoons, and watch this moorland stream belting out of the hillside over the sandstone rocks. It's a wonderful sight. Bet you like it in your own garden, but if you can't afford the pump, don't worry, because here's a way to spray it with flowers. The West Midlands garden shows lobelia in all different shades of blue, cascading down a hillside in one tremendous rivulet, mixed up with silver-leaved cineraria. If your money comes from tourism, as it does at Blackpool, then you might as well give them a bit of the old razzle-dazzle. They've brought part of the pleasure beach, a Ferris wheel. And down on the sandy beach by Blackpool Pier, the tide is just beginning to come in. Great washes of blue ageratum with frothy white crests to the waves. And when the sand's got in your sandwiches and the donkeys have plodded home, you can wend your way back to the digs in a Blackpool tram, like this one, made from thousands of carpet bedding plants. There's green Altanthera, golden pyrethrum and blue-grey house leeks. Here, it travels along a golden mile that's covered in orange and yellow French marigolds, past the roller coaster on the pleasure beach to one of the best bits of sculpture here, Blackpool Tower. And from where I'm standing, this looks almost as tall as the real thing.
Now here's a garden that should be a source of inspiration to us all, not just because it's one of the best gardens in the show, but also because it's an example of real gardening enthusiasm. The whole garden was built and is maintained by amateur gardeners from the Staffordshire Association of Village Produce Guilds. They come here every day just to maintain the garden and to answer people's questions. They do it all for nothing, just for the love of gardening. And it's a garden that is packed full of good gardening ideas. Lots of good lessons to be learnt here on how to use plants properly. This corner here is very hot and sunny, so they've used here mainly plants with grey leaves, because it's the grey foliage plants that really thrive in the hot, dry conditions. But up here, the bank steepens considerably, and that's difficult for maintenance. So in order to cut down the work, they've planted with attractive dwarf conifers and interplanted those with heathers, which eventually will spread out, keep the weeds down, and that'll reduce maintenance to a bare minimum. The easiest thing to make a bodge of in the garden is the rock garden. But here they've done the job perfectly. Of course, they've got a lot of rock in the north of Staffordshire, so they have the chance to go out and see how it lies naturally, and that's the way you want to try and reproduce it in the garden. Notice here how the strata lines, the cracks of the rock, run all level. And that's the way that you make it look as though it's been there for donkey's years. The correct planting is important too. Here, where the splashing of the waterfall keeps the soil moist, they've used things like primulas and creeping jenny down there, things that love a moist situation. But in between the rocks up here, it's very, very dry and well drained, and there they've had to stick to alpine plants that grow naturally in the mountainside. The pool is very well done too. They've avoided the one glaring mistake of allowing too much of the liner to be seen. It's essential with these things to get the pool absolutely level in the first place, and then you'll get a really natural look like this. And even their bedding plants are absolutely spot on for a small plot. There's no parks department look about this lot. No straight lines of blue and white. Instead,
which are very difficult to fit into the general scheme of things, so you tend to tuck them away, like the vegetable patch. But if I had a plot like this one, designed by members of the National Vegetable Society, I'd be inclined to put it outside my front window and show off. It's a good-looking garden, and it's a practical one too, because the beds here are edged with posts to raise them up, rustic poles in this case, and down here, smaller timber edging. Now, raised beds are great for several reasons. Firstly, if you're trying to grow root crops on stony soil, you can sieve the soil before you put it in. If you've got very greedy crops, you can add lots of nourishment to a relatively small area. And if you're on clay, this means that your soil is much more freely drained. Mind you, drainage can be a problem with really greedy and hungry and thirsty crops. Things like this courgette here, they've got rather a natty way of getting the water straight to the roots by putting a plastic plant pot sunk into the soil, and you can pour all your water into that. But if you're not a keen vegetable grower and you only grow one vegetable crop, make it lettuce, because it's dead easy. And it's available now in all sorts of different colour variations. Bright green and frilly, or a rich rosy red, easy to grow in any situation. But if you're an enthusiast, you'll be going for the show bench and the exhibition. So lay in store a few of these dustbins. Not to throw in the things that don't really come off, but to grow your carrots and parsnips in. Fill your bin up with sieved, rich compost, and those roots will go right down to the very bottom. Come the autumn, you'll absolutely sweep the board at the show. Now, there's nothing very pretty about an old dustbin, but there is about an old cart wheel, especially if you can plant it up with herbs. In this case, varieties of thyme, but you could have a different low-growing herb in between every spoke. This is a herb garden, again with raised beds, and like those in the vegetable garden, they really are excellent for people who are getting on a bit in years and finding it difficult to bend. The paths are good and wide too, to allow wheelchair access, and however small your garden, you can fit in a few pot herbs in sinks, chimney pots, or an old flower pot. But for some folk, herb growing is less than riveting, so while you're musing over the marjoram, send the kids next door to the farm, where they'll see piglets and calves just a few days old, all in the interests of showing modern-day farming practices to a modern generation. And twice a day on the groundwork farm, the countryside really comes to town. There's a chance to see a milking parlour in action. 14 litres a day from this beauty. So if you think that milk's just something you get out of bottles, even if you don't actually get a chance to come here and work in a milking machine like this, First time for me and a bit frightening, I can tell you. It's worth coming, just have a look. Phil Archer, eat your heart out. All right, my love.
As a keen plantsman, I was looking forward to visiting the festival to see those gardens where interesting and unusual plants were being grown. I found a whole range of gardens containing them, including this one, planted by the Royal Parks. Now, it's basically a series of pools connected by cascades. And around the edges, there are beds and borders in which have been planted a very wide range of interesting and some common plants. There are perennial plants, things like the astilbes and the purple lithrum there, and big, bold foliage plants like that ornamental rhubarb. And then in front of me here in these beds, a very wide selection of what I can only call half-hardy plants, borderline hardiness, plants from the Mediterranean regions, interesting leaves, unusual colours, a whole wealth of plants for people like me, plants people. The Stapley Water Gardens exhibit, like the Royal Parks back there, is one of these gardens in which interesting plants and water have been combined. But here with a difference, because this is a formal Italian design, formal Italian garden, with this amazing centrepiece, this wonderful fountain. There's said to be 12 programmes of water jets, some of them really spectacular. And in this pool, interesting plants in the shape of water lilies. Well, what would you expect? Water gardens. A whole raft of different varieties, pale yellows down to pinks and reds. And cruising effortlessly beneath the pads in that dark water, Japanese koi carp. Some of the largest are 25 years old and apparently worth a cool £1,200. What must be a plant lover's paradise is this garden by Bridgemere Nurseries. In fact, it's 7 gardens in one. Gardens of many kinds, but I think my favourite has to be this one, a garden of annuals. A lot of my favourites here. Baby blue eyes, that great pool of blue there, an annual plant from North America. Another North American plant, California this time, poached egg or fried egg plant, Limnanthes douglasii. There's the big flower, the big pale rose-flowered Viscaria there, another of the corncockle tribe, and then candytuft. Several kinds here, and this rather splendid one with a spiralling flower. Now, these plants may look difficult, but they're not. They're simplicity itself. They're plants that all the family can grow, bringing enjoyment and colour right through the summer. And really, that's what this festival is all about. Enjoyment and fun for the whole family. Has anybody seen a little green tennis ball? So, for another begonia, there we go. 160, 150,
And if you want to combine your gardening with a bit of fun, how about buying your plants like this? Plants or Dutch cheese or those lovely Dutch sausages. Yes, here on the Dutch exhibition is a real Dutch auction. This is the way that the growers in Holland actually sell their plants. In fact, it's an auction in reverse, because you start at a high price, and as that hand ticks round the clock, the price gets lower and lower and lower. When it reaches the sort of price that you are prepared to pay, that's when you press the button. Hopefully before anybody else does. It's great fun, but it takes a bit of concentration.
Is the retail price.
Found out they are not